There's a moment in this game that tells you everything about where the Indiana Fever are right now and where they're headed. Alyssa Thomas threw an elbow directly at Caitlin Clark's head in the fourth quarter. Not a brush, not incidental contact, from a hard screen. An elbow aimed at her head. Multiple camera angles caught it clean. And when the referee reviewed the play, they called the foul on Clark. Not Thomas. Clark. The player who just absorbed the elbow walked away from that sequence with the foul on her own stat line. And then, just minutes later in that same quarter, Clark picked up a technical foul. Not for arguing, not for shoving anyone, not for saying a single word to an official. She clapped her hands. That was the whole thing. A referee watched Caitlin Clark clap her hands and decided that was worth a technical foul in a professional basketball game. That sequence, the elbow that got called the wrong way and the technical for clapping, didn't break Clark's night. It didn't slow Indiana down. What it actually did was wake up two players who had been waiting for exactly that kind of invitation. And what Sophie Cunningham and Maisha Hines-Allen did after that moment is the reason every team in the WNBA is going to think twice before they send someone to rough up Caitlin Clark again. To understand why June 22nd hit the way it did, you have to go back and understand what Phoenix came into Gainbridge Fieldhouse planning to do. Alyssa Thomas had a very specific assignment, and it wasn't subtle. Get physical with Clark every single time she came near the paint. Set screens that felt more like car crashes. Throw elbows in traffic. Make Indiana's offense so uncomfortable and so disrupted from the opening tip that they could never find any rhythm at all. Thomas is built for that kind of work. She's strong, she plays with an edge, and she's been one of the more physical players in the league for years. But what made Phoenix so confident bringing this approach into 2026 is that they'd already seen it work. Back in 2024, Thomas straight up body checked Clark during a game, and the refs put their whistles in their pockets and watched it happen. No call. Clark absorbed it and kept playing. Phoenix remembered that very clearly, and their entire defensive strategy in this game was built on the assumption that the same thing would happen again. That Clark would take the hits, the officials would let it go, and Indiana would eventually crack under the pressure of playing against a team willing to be that physical without any consequences attached to it. The first quarter made it look like that plan was going to work perfectly. The Fever were a mess in those first 10 minutes. Shot selection was off, ball movement dried up completely, and Indiana could not generate anything clean against Phoenix's physical defense. Every time Clark tried to initiate offense, there was contact. Every time she came off a screen, Thomas or someone else was right there making sure nothing came easy. The Fever finished that first quarter with 6 points, and without a three-pointer Kelsey Mitchell hit in the final seconds, they would have finished with 3 points. One made field goal in 10 minutes of professional basketball against a team that was feeding off every single moment of it. Phoenix had exactly what they came for. Indiana looked stuck, disorganized, and completely unable to figure out how to play through the physical pressure being put on their best player. The crowd at Gainbridge was restless, the offense had no answers, and Phoenix looked like they were executing a blueprint that was going to carry them through 40 minutes without much resistance. What they hadn't accounted for is what Caitlin Clark does when she decides a game needs to change. The second quarter was the answer to everything that happened in the first. Clark came out attacking, not settling, not trying to manage the situation or work around the physicality, actually attacking Phoenix off the dribble, pulling up from deep and daring the defense to keep up with her. She dropped 15 points in that quarter alone, 15 in one quarter, on a night when her team had nearly finished the first period with a single made basket. The offense that had been completely frozen suddenly had answers everywhere. Part of what made that run so significant wasn't just Clark's individual scoring, it was that Phoenix couldn't just lock onto her and call it a defensive game plan anymore. The Clark-Billings connection started clicking in a real and visible way during that stretch, and Fever fans had been waiting to see it come together since Monique Billings joined the roster. Clark talked about it after the game, explaining that in the WNBA you don't get a lot of time to develop chemistry with new teammates, but she and Billings had logged serious hours together playing internationally on Team USA, and that foundation was showing up in real time. Clark threaded passes into the post. Billings caught them and finished, not fumbling, not bobbling, just catching and scoring with the kind of comfort that only comes from genuinely knowing how your teammate operates. Raven Johnson found her spots too, and suddenly Phoenix was facing an Indiana offense with multiple answers, which is a completely different defensive problem than the one they thought they'd signed up for. The Fever went from nearly 3 points in the first quarter to tying the game at 41 by halftime. A 16-point swing built almost entirely on Clark, deciding the first quarter was something she was done with. But Phoenix wasn't done being physical, and that's where things escalated from a competitive game into something that became national news by the time the final buzzer sounded. DeWanna Bonner got into it with Clark in a way that went past the normal rough and tumble of a WNBA game, the kind of contact that has a different feel to it, that isn't just two players fighting for position but something more pointed than that. And that's the exact moment Sophie Cunningham stepped in. No waiting, no looking to see how the officials were going to handle it, no hesitation at all. Cunningham put herself directly between Clark and Bonner and made it very clear that if Bonner wanted to keep pushing, she was going to have to go through Sophie first. The thing that makes Cunningham's reaction so significant is that this isn't something she started doing this year. Back in 2025, when JC Sheldon tried to poke Clark in the eye during a game, Cunningham stepped up to defend her, even though they were still early in their time as teammates. Sheldon swiped at Clark's eyes, and Cunningham drew a line right there. It didn't matter which jersey Clark was wearing, or what the score was, or what moment in the game it happened in. Cunningham explained her thinking in a way that wasn't complicated at all. She said that when you love people, you just want them to be good and be their best selves. That's it. No basketball strategy attached to it, no calculated team-building philosophy. She just doesn't let people get away with dirty play against someone she cares about. And now that they've been running it back together for another season, that protectiveness has no ceiling on it. Cunningham spaces the floor well enough on offense that she can't be ignored. She plays physical defense, and she will absolutely not let someone put their hands on Clark without answering for it. She picked up a technical in the middle of the fourth quarter chaos, and she did not look even slightly bothered by it. Letting Bonner think she could keep escalating without any pushback was never something Cunningham was willing to consider. If Cunningham's involvement was the most visible part of Indiana's response, then Myisha Hines-Allen's involvement was the most consequential. And to understand what she did on June 22nd, you have to go back 11 days to a game against Chicago that set the whole thing up. JC Sheldon has a documented history of going after Clark's eyes, and in that Chicago game she did it twice, swiped down at Clark on one play, then tried the same move on a separate possession. Clark had to manage all of that while also running the offense, reading the defense, calling plays, and trying to win a basketball game. That's a genuinely unfair thing to ask of anyone, and Hines-Allen was watching every second of it from the other end of the court. She didn't say anything in the moment, didn't make a production out of it. She just watched it happen and she didn't forget. A few possessions later, Sheldon drove to the basket, and Hines-Allen met her there with a block that wasn't a clean basketball play, that happened to be physical. It was a full demolition. Sheldon went crashing to the floor, and the cameras caught Clark's reaction on the sideline immediately after. She had this look on her face that read almost sympathetic, like she actually felt a little bad for the person who had just been trying to gouge her eyes out minutes earlier. The contrast between Hines Allen's complete ferocity and Clark standing there looking almost sorry for the person who got destroyed was genuinely funny, but more than that, it was revealing. It showed exactly what kind of dynamic was forming on this Indiana roster. So when Thomas threw that elbow on June 22nd, and the referee looked at the play and called it on Clark instead, Hines Allen was not interested in letting that go. The confrontation with Thomas escalated fast. Hines Allen stepped in, got physical with Thomas, and because she'd already picked up one technical in the chaos around that sequence, the second one came immediately and she was ejected from the game. She walked off that court having defended her teammate, and it cost Indiana her minutes for everything that followed. Every single player on that Fever roster watched that happen and understood exactly what it meant. Hines Allen will go all the way to ejection before she lets someone throw elbows at Clark and walk away clean. That changes how a locker room operates. Players compete differently, run harder, and take more risks when they know their teammates have their backs, in a way that is real and physical and not just emotional support from the sideline. Phoenix built their entire defensive approach on the idea that they could rough Clark up and there wouldn't be any real consequences for doing it. Cunningham and Hines Allen spent the entire night of June 22nd making that approach look extremely expensive. The fourth quarter became something that would have sounded made up if someone tried to describe it to a person who hadn't watched the game. 6 technical fouls and an ejection in roughly an 8-second window. Thomas, Bonner, Cunningham, Hines Allen, and Clark all tangled up in the same sequence, coaches out on the floor, security coming off the bench, the crowd at Gainbridge completely unhinged. Clark's technical for clapping sat at the center of all of it, partly because of how obvious a non-call it was that somehow became a call anyway, and partly because Thomas had just thrown a clean elbow at Clark's head in the same quarter and walked away with nothing. The contrast between those two plays in the same game was almost impossible to look away from. And then came the moment that the entire building seemed to understand at the exact same instant. Thomas and Bonner both stepped to the free throw line in the aftermath of all that chaos, each of them getting the chance to add points after the officials sorted through what had just happened. And both of them missed. Clark was standing right there watching it unfold, with a look on her face that didn't need any words attached to it. There's an old basketball phrase, "ball don't lie," that means the universe has a way of correcting bad calls through missed free throws. On June 22nd, the universe collected from both of them. Clark walked away from that sequence and from that night with 24 points, 9 assists, and only 3 turnovers in 29 minutes of action. 9 assists with 3 turnovers in a game that chaotic means she was reading the defense correctly almost every single time she chose to give up the ball. She did that while absorbing elbows, dealing with calls that went the wrong way, and running an offense that needed her to be everywhere at once. Her scoring and assists accounted for more than 50% of Indiana's 86 total points. When people say Clark is carrying this team, that's not just a feeling, that's arithmetic. Monique Billings finished with 14 points and 10 rebounds, and the chemistry between her and Clark that showed up during the second quarter comeback didn't disappear when the pressure got heavier. It held all the way through. Billings caught passes in traffic and finished at the rim in a way that simply wasn't there earlier in her time with the Fever, and that's the direct result of the hours she and Clark put in together internationally. Kelsey Mitchell added 22 points on top of that. 3 Indiana players in double figures, and when the Fever offense looks like that, It genuinely doesn't have a straightforward answer because you cannot just sag off everyone else and guard Clark. That version of Indiana is a different team entirely from the one Phoenix pushed around in 2024. Clark walked into the post-game press conference and didn't soften a single thing. She said directly and with her name on it and cameras rolling that she got a technical foul for clapping, and that if that's how things are going to go, everyone should just go ahead and mark a date on the calendar now for when she's going to get suspended. She confirmed that referee Gerda Gatling told her the technical was for clapping and instigating, and Clark's response to that explanation, delivered calmly and without any attempt to be diplomatic about it, was that if that's the reasoning, then the official just doesn't like competitive basketball. And that's facts. That's reality. And it's disappointing. She also said she'd love to hear the league's official explanation for why she got a technical in that situation, while other players in the same sequence did not. Or at minimum, she said, split it. Give everyone a technical if that's the standard being applied. That's not what happened. Coach Stephanie White handled the post-game question more carefully, acknowledging that the team needs to stay composed while also making clear that certain calls can't be allowed to derail a game. That's the answer of someone who agrees with her player completely and just can't say it in quite that plain a way in an official setting. Yahoo Sports, Fox Sports, and international outlets all picked up Clark's quotes within hours. The officiating conversation around her has been building for 2 full years, and this game handed everyone fresh material in a single night. But here's the thing that made her comments land with a different kind of weight. She said all of it after winning. She wasn't sitting at that podium trying to explain away a loss or redirect attention from a bad performance. She dropped 24 points, broke her own WNBA record for consecutive games with at least 20 points and 5 assists, and then called the officiating ridiculous while sitting in the winner's seat. Nobody can dismiss that as someone making excuses. She was pointing at a specific and documented pattern: the elbow with no call and the clap with a technical in the same quarter, and she was naming it out loud, with the scoreboard already in Indiana's favor. Phoenix was coming back to face Indiana 48 hours later, and every single piece of what happened on June 22nd was going to follow both teams into that rematch. The elbow, the phantom technical, the ejection, the missed free throws, the record. Thomas and Bonner were going to walk back into Gainbridge and try the same physical approach, because that's what they do, and it's worked before. But Cunningham and Hines Allen had just spent an entire game making it very clear what the cost of that approach looks like now. Hines Allen went to ejection rather than let it go. Cunningham picked up a technical and didn't flinch. That's not a deterrent you build in a single game. That's a message the entire league received at the same time. Indiana doesn't quietly absorb cheap shots anymore. That version of this team is gone. Clark is breaking her own records in the middle of chaos. Billings is finishing at the rim. Mitchell is dropping 22 in a supporting role. And the toughness that Phoenix exploited so effectively in 2024 has a completely different price tag on it now. Clark already told the league exactly where she stands. If they're going to give her a technical foul for clapping, then so be it, that's their choice. Cunningham and Hines Allen have already made clear what their choice looks like, and every team on the schedule watched June 22nd happen and now has to decide whether the old approach to defending Caitlin Clark is still worth it.